Thank you, guys. Hold on. Oh, whoops. Is it turned on? Am I moving it? No? Oh, there. Do I just need to push it harder? Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. To me, the liberal arts are about something that is explicitly not career training. It's about different styles of thinking and accumulating the most diverse toolbox that you can, because you don't know what's going to be useful to you. It's a recognition that you're storing up styles of knowledge that will serve you for hopefully the next 7 decades of your life, maybe even longer, and not just for that first job right out of college. So there's one of the oldest shorthand versions of this is almost 3,000 years old, and you probably have heard it. A fox knows many things, a hedgehog knows one big thing, and liberal arts training is basically all about turning yourself into a fox. You know, the conviction that, like, you know, you are going to need to learn a whole bunch of different things, and you may not even know what those things are. And so you're setting yourself up with these kind of meta skills about curiosity and like being able to pick up new things. Okay, so unlike many of the speakers today, I am actually giving a show, not a tell talk. So I am going to be talking about the kind of research that I do. So in 2007, a book from the 1600s was rediscovered in the Shanghai Library. And I'm going to talk today about what I figured out about this book with liberal arts skills acquired from my own liberal arts education many decades ago. This book is called Jingshi, and I'm going to be using the Chinese title. It's a history of lenses, written by someone named Sun Yunqiu around 1681, and he was from Suzhou in China. So obviously, reading this book requires a lot of different skills that are acquired by studying language. I'm going to flip you through this book really quickly. Starts with a bunch of prefaces, and then in the core of the book, various devices with lenses are described. Each of these is matched with a picture, and it ends with some prefaces from some postfaces. So most importantly, here is the page about spectacles, and here is the page, spectacles, and here are the pages about the telescope. Now, one of the things you'll notice very quickly is that in this book, lenses are for consumption. They're not something to be made. So people thought that Jingshi would look like these pictures, which are from the 1620s in a collab between a Jesuit and his Chinese collaborator. And clearly, these pictures that you're seeing here are technical in a way that the pictures in Jingshi aren't. So how do we understand this book? A bunch of scholars have written about it. We were all so intrigued when it was rediscovered. And there isn't a sense of agreement about what this book does. And so some of the arguments are that it's an advertisement, that it's a way to explore how people see, that it's a way to establish a persona that is both scholar and artisan. But everyone assumed that Sun Yunqiu actually could make advanced lenses. And in fact, one of these scholars says explicitly, it's just not that hard. So I set out to kind of figure out what somebody actually could do with 17th century Chinese skills. And that's tricky because there is no surviving Chinese lens from the 1600s that's available to be looked at. So what is left to me are comparative tools, learning as much as both as it was practiced in early modern Europe and also as it is practiced now by hobbyists, reading as many sources as I can, not just in Chinese, but also in Italian. So this, Maximum Fox. So let's start by talking a little bit about the telescope. From its very beginnings was a global technology to a shocking degree. So keep an eye on these dates because you will be shocked by how quickly the telescope moves all over the world. In the Netherlands, finding it's going off and on. Okay, I'll just try to talk a little bit more loudly. You have a few people out there who, excuse me, who actually knew what a telescope was. I'm going to drag this back a little bit because I'm afraid of falling off the stage. Okay. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, great. Okay, so this is the answer to how hard could it really be. Really, really hard. I'm not even going to get into the glass portion, but if anyone wants to talk to me about glass, I can talk to you about glass for hours. Glass is so important in European history that the secrets to making glass, clear glass, are how intellectual property law originated in Venice. Okay, so all early lenses in China were made of rock crystal. So what did Sun Yunqiu's workshop do? Here's our big clue. They brag about these two things. And I'm going to just give you a quick refresher on corrective vision. So a quick show of hands. How many of you have difficulty seeing things close up? You can be honest. Okay, okay. You have presbyopia, and your vision is corrected with a convex lens, and you're probably over the age of 45, though you may tell people otherwise. How many of you have difficulty seeing things far away? Okay. This is called myopia, and it's corrected with a concave lens, one that sticks in. And you probably were diagnosed pretty early in life when you were young. Okay, so with machine-made lenses, there is essentially a kind of, you don't really need to know the difference between these. You're going to just go get your glasses at Warby Parker. But centuries ago, convex lenses were far easier to make. So in Europe, the first corrective lenses for presbyopia can be dated to 1285, but concave lenses weren't developed until the 1400s, a gap of almost 200 years. And you can see the lens that is Leo X is holding in his hand right there. This is the actual lens. It's held in Museo Galileo. So here's what I found by combing through many, many Chinese sources. And they're all about spectacles. Basically, before 1500, spectacles are always foreign. And people are always saying, oh, I got this in Malacca, I got this in Gansu. And even in the 1500s, they're so unusual that people don't know how they work. They say things like, I borrowed my friends and they must be broken because they don't work for me. Or, I think these must be made out of some big clamshell. And so something changes around 1650. And that thing is we start seeing a few documents talking about exports to Nagasaki. So Chinese people are sending glasses to Japan. And you also start finding texts like this. And they basically start saying, glasses are now cheap. We can make spectacles. But what they're making are convex lens spectacles, what we would call readers. And often they will add this. Hold on. They will add this, that nobody knew how to make concave lenses. So how is it that nobody knew how to make concave lenses? So I'm going to have to get to this question. How do you make a lens? Who's actually doing the lens making? So there are no records of lens making in 17th century China. but the most famous book about artisanal work gives us important clues. So here is the exploitation of the works of nature on jade carving. So these are two pictures of jade carvers. And basically what we know is that the tools for grinding and polishing hard stones are the same all over the world, and they haven't changed for thousands of years. All you need is a rotating surface that you keep wet, it can be vertical, and you manipulate it with your feet. And all a lens is a really hard rock, okay? So if you can make this, you can make a convex lens easily. So skilled craftsmen could do this. And you can see, actually, hold on, that the tools for making spectacles on your left are the same as the tools for making jadeware on your right. And also, moreover, we can trace where there are spectacle stores in Suzhou in the 1900s and the 1800s. And guess what? The spectacle stores are exactly where the jade carvers were in the 13 and 1400s. And almost certainly, some of these businesses actually learned things from Sun Yunqiu's business. So what have we learned here? What we've learned is there is one technological breakthrough that accounts for glasses for myopia and the idea of a prescription. And that technological breakthrough is this. It's the mold. So rather than simply holding a piece of rock crystal against a plane to make a convex shape, Sun Yunqiu's workshop must have used spherical molds of different sizes. So at the simplest, you would have a little metal sphere that you stick on the middle of your grinding stone, and then you would hold the rock against it. But the same principle can also be used to make better convex lenses, where you have a round bowl. And so then you have a kind of perfect curvature instead of something that a craftsman is eyeballing. And so this is how you standardize things. These are Italian, incidentally, a whole museum filled with lens molds. I'm probably the only person to have visited in the last 10 years. So here's a spectacle maker from the 20th century posing with his molds. Now, it still leaves a ton unknown, but you wonder, how did anyone in Sun Yunqiu's workshop figure this out? Did they go out and hire metal fabricators to make these molds? But I think the key thing that you're learning from all of this, which is what I was so excited by, is that the process is that of a team. It's about shared expertise. It's about finding those jade grinders who know how to make something when you have a theoretical knowledge, probably from a Jesuit book. So what about the telescope? In Jingshi, there is a summary of what it is like to look through a telescope. And the device that's being described here is a Galilean telescope. And we know because the images that Wen Kangyi writes about are right side up. So what is a Galilean telescope? It's two lenses. It's a concave eyepiece and a convex objective. So I spent an afternoon playing around with a replica of one of the oldest, and it is so fun to play around with it, but they're so hard to use. And they're also, what we know, are so hard to make. So the 20th century journalists who do a lot of documentation of the spectacle industry in China then emphasize that the lenses that are being made are functional but imprecise. Often they're not able to control curvature very well. The molds are not very spherical. And the reason is because rock, crystal, and glass are so hard that they will deform metal molds. So what we've learned is if you wanted to put a telescope together, you would have to use nearly perfect lenses. So here is an explanation of why. A good spectacle lens only needs to have consistent curvature right along where your eye is going to look out. But a good telescope objective needs to be perfect all the way through because light is coming in all the way through. Okay, so what did I learn? Could Sun Yunqiu really have made a telescope? And if he did, why in 17th century China did no one ever do so again? And why was nothing preserved? You know, it's a little bit deflating to learn that I don't think anyone could have used Jingshi to make a telescope. Perhaps he acquired a Jesuit telescope. Maybe he somehow acquired a team of craftsmen who had worked in the palace under the Jesuits. But I think the key thing to me is that whatever happened emerged out of a team that he needed to learn from, he needed to connect with others, and that the real achievement in the Jingshi that's being recorded there, the invention of use of molds, has essentially been erased for the last few hundred years. And it actually requires effort to make those voices heard again. What does this have to do with what you get from a liberal arts education? Now, I think the first thing to me, and I think it's so evident, is that it feels so fun and good to think this way, that we as human beings, this is one of the great heights of what we are as humans, to think in these like kind of multiple ways and to use our curiosity and to ask questions and to use these tools to solve problems. The other thing is, so many of the scholars who have worked on this book were focused just on Sun Yunqiu, but the team and the network is, to me, much more interesting. How an elite person worked with people who are artisans and how he obviously learned from them. So at the core of this project that I'm still in the process of is this sense that even in a project that has to do with lenses, with the whole world, a kind of global circulation of knowledge with science, is my study of language. That reading these texts in their original languages opens up whole worlds that are almost unimaginable otherwise. You know, so what is it to study language? Studying language is about connecting with people. And in this case, it isn't just texts, it's also connecting with people who really are experts. I talked to so many people who, believe it or not, are still making telescope mirrors in their garages. Early telescope scholars, librarians, scientists, and kind of replicating in modern days this team that I was studying in the 17th century. And without meeting people in other languages, and yes, I did have to speak my terrible Italian, as well as, obviously, Chinese, there's no connecting with people where they are. And that means connections not just through space, but also connections through time. So what are languages? It's listening, it's understanding, it's bringing people together. And for me, that is the core of the Fox skills. Thank you so much.
At this time, we're delighted to welcome John Lyon, who is the chair of the School of Modern Languages, also serves as professor and our Smithgall professor as well. Please join us in welcoming John Lyon to respond.
So thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Professor Liu, for coming to us from Yale. I'm excited to see you as next president of the Modern Language Association. That's going to be fantastic. And I really appreciated what you had to say, and I wanted to respond to Professor Liu by first sharing an example that I think helps demonstrate one of these aspects of thinking like a fox, being like a fox, how languages help us do that. And after sharing that with you, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we help our students and our faculty in the School of Modern Languages do that. So many of you may have heard of Schrödinger's cat. This is an example from quantum physics. You may know of Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist, and it's a thought experiment, a sadistic thought experiment in which a cat is enclosed in a box with a toxin that may be released if a certain radioactive element decays in a certain amount of time. But we're outside the box, and we don't know what has happened. And so is that cat, has the toxin been released and is the cat dead? Or Is a cat still alive? Talks not happen. And so we have this state of uncertainty of mind. Schrödinger used this example to describe the quantum physical property known as superposition. When you have a particle that is spinning on two different axes at the same time, which, according to classical physics, shouldn't happen, right? But you have two states at the same time, and you can't determine which one is happening. And so, because this is so counterintuitive, Schrödinger gave us this strange thought experiment to help us understand this more clearly. This strange phenomenon where two things are happening at once, and we don't know what it is. And only by intervening in the process, by opening the box, do we find out which one it is. Well, this metaphor raises questions crucial to quantum physics. How long do superposed states last? And how do they transform into fixed states? Is it our intervention that changes things, or do they do this on their own? And it has also, for what it's worth, generated countless memes on the internet. So it's been a very productive metaphor that Schrödinger has given us. Now, while many of you may be familiar with the concept of superposition in physics, or at least of the story of Schrödinger's cat, you may not be aware that Erwin Schrödinger himself was also a poet. He published his own volume of poetry, Gedichte, in 1949, and this is a volume that demonstrates the influence of the contemporary international poetic landscape around him. It included translations into the German of William Butler Yeats's poetry. So Schrödinger was very much aware of and involved in poetic language. Is this just a coincidence? Just a hobby on the side? And my argument is going to be no, it was not. It is fundamental to what he's doing. This is fundamental, that language is fundamental to innovation in STEM. Let me try and explain why. Most of the leading quantum physicists of the early 20th century would have had a classical European education. In the case of majority of my classical German education, which meant that you learned Latin and you learned Greek and you studied multiple foreign languages, you studied what we call the humanities, the liberal arts, as well as the sciences. This includes physicists such as Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Wolfgang Pauli, and others. And so a strong humanistic education was part of their fundamental education. So why would poetry and language be important for quantum physics? Sveta Sofronieva argues that, quote, in professional journals, personal letters, and popular essays, Erwin Schrödinger and his fellow physicists were involved in an ongoing debate about the nature of quantum mechanics, looking for a language to discuss the new theory and addressing the essential link between language and reality. She cites Werner Heisenberg, who wrote, am I on the right quote here? No. I think I skipped, yeah, there we go. The real problem behind controversies was the fact that no languages existed in which one could speak consistently about the new situation. And the new situation is quantum physics. We don't have the words to talk about entanglement, to talk about superposition, to talk about these quantum mechanical phenomena that are so far removed from our personal experience. Quantum physicists face a challenge that poets of the same era were struggling with. I'm thinking particularly of a German poet named Hugo von Hofmannsthal, saying that language is not commensurate to reality anymore. It can't describe our current reality. In the case of quantum physics, this was a matter of scale. The reality they were trying to describe was so much smaller than any of us can even conceive of. Too small to be seen, too foreign to be understood through our daily experience. And for this reason, quantum physicists turned to what we would call poetic, metaphorical language. There we go. Niels Bohr, as cited by Heisenberg, wrote, we must explain that when it comes to atoms, language can be used only as poetry. The poet, too, is not nearly so concerned with describing facts as with creating images and establishing mental connections. So in this context, Bohr is telling us that poetic language serves not as a language of immediate experience, but as a type of compensation for a lack of language to describe experience that we can't understand, we can't see. It's not close enough to us. Poetry as a language of the imagination allows us to envision phenomena that have empirical existence, but that is inaccessible to our regular experience. Poetry, the most potent, condensed form of language, is particularly necessary in a field such as quantum physics, which eludes easy understanding. Richard Feynman's famous quote you may be familiar with that says, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. So it's something terribly difficult to grasp. Language has to be pressed into the service of creating images and establishing mental connections. So although no real cats were harmed in Schrodinger's thought experiment, the image of a cat, something from daily life that we all are familiar with, makes accessible to a wider audience a complex counterintuitive concept such as quantum superposition. To expand on this idea, I'd like to cite Ludwig Wittgenstein's well-known dictum, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." According to Wittgenstein, we cannot think outside of language. Our thinking is shaped by the specific languages we know. And I'd like to pair that idea, going back to an ad campaign from the 1990s by Apple, Think Different. Thinking different is what Georgia Tech wants its students to do, to innovate, to create, to find new ways to solve the challenges that face us in our world today. Technological and scientific knowledge constitute an important part of that endeavor, but without the ability to think different, to expand the conceptual limits of our world, our engineers and scientists have limited themselves. To enhance our ability to think different, we need to think outside of our everyday language. We need to learn new languages and even invent new languages, as early quantum physicists did. And I believe that this is the reason that one of Georgia Tech's fundamental values is to connect globally. Connecting globally is not a one-directional initiative where we send out what we've created to the rest of the world. It is a reciprocal engagement where we get something back. We learn something, we learn to think differently by seeing how other people in other parts of the world communicate and do things differently. And so this is why in the School of Modern Languages we embrace the Fox mentality that Professor Liu described. On this slide, I've listed a sampling of some of the things we do in our school that demonstrate the linkages between the STEM fields and the humanities. And time isn't going to allow me to discuss each of these. And this morning, as I was hearing other presentations, I was adding to this list. So I'd probably double it if I was given the chance to go back in and change my PowerPoint. But I'll just touch on a few. We have signature study abroad programs called LBATs, which were innovative when they were first introduced. We've had a lot of imitators across the country because of this, where we take students, bring them to a target language environment, and then introduce them to business leaders, to technology leaders, bring them to factory floors, let them see how things are made. This is not just a favorite sightseeing spots. They're learning something about the technological and business world in another country. We've had students telling us that these are life-changing experiences to be able to do this. In our school, we have a number of initiatives that expand traditional humanistic study. Our faculty has focused recently very strongly on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And recently, so just last year, a group of our faculty published a textbook on teaching these goals across cultures and languages. We build cross-disciplinary connections with other schools and disciplines, whether with linguistics and computing, with the cyber program in the Scheller School of Business, with the School of Economics and School of International Affairs. Captain Rodriguez mentioned this morning the Project Go, which is a federally funded initiative to train students in critical languages to become leaders in the military, and it provides for them to go study in foreign countries, enhancing their ability to be better leaders. Currently, we have a project in development with aerospace engineering, and Russian. We are working on other similar types of projects to expand our reach to show how our students can use language to be innovative to improve their world. Our faculty pursue cutting-edge research and develop research collaborations on topics as varied as energy and the environment, the human voice, birdsong and ecology. Come over to Swan Building and you'll see there's actually a haiku box out there that records the sounds of birds migrating through. Language science, many others. I've listed some of our faculty research topics up here as well, but I don't have the time to discuss each of them. I want to emphasize that the School of Modern Languages embodies this model that Professor Liu was talking about, this thinking like a fox, finding all the different tools we can, and language is one of the most fundamental tools that we have to think about change and innovation. And so I want to thank her for her words today, for all that she's offered to us, and I'm grateful for the chance to speak with you, and I'm grateful for what School of Modern Languages has to offer our students, our programs, and other schools here at Georgia Tech. So thank you all for listening.